Hi, welcome to the Pathway to Endowment, Learnings from Around the Region. Today's webinar from Collins Group, a division of Campbell & Company. My name is Nerea Hopt. Thank you for joining us. I'm the Marketing Associate here. And before we get started, I'd like to go through just a couple logistical issues. First of all, we highly recommend that you close all programs on your computer other than GoToWebinar. And that you use the telephone option for audio rather than your computer's microphone. It just works a little bit better. If you're having any audio issues, again, we highly recommend you call in with your phone, mute your phone, and if you experience any visual issues, you can send us a chat in the chat box on your control panel for GoToWebinar. And if you have any other issues, you can contact GoToWebinar at the 800 number listed there. And yes, this webinar, including the slides and audio, will be available for viewing and download on our website later today. Everyone who's on this webinar who registered will get an email with a link for where to download that. And if you have any questions about the content during the webinar, please just send it to us in that chat box, and there'll be some time at the end where we'll be answering questions. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Julie Bianchi, consultant here at Collins Group, and we'll get started. Thanks again.
Well, good morning. This is Julie, and you will be hearing my voice throughout the webinar this morning. The other half of the study team, Barb Madwell, who many of you likely know, was called away on a family emergency this week, so she's not able to join us, but be reassured that her fingerprints are all over this. She was a driving force behind this study, so I'll be channeling her as well throughout. So as I said, I'll be kind of guiding you through the webinar, and what you need to know about me is I spend my days thinking about fundraising here at Collins Group. I specialize in developing major gifts, campaign planning, and case development, specifically in human services organizations and education organizations like independent schools. And that is really what you need to know about me, but what you need to know about the whole group on the call, because there are many of us around this virtual table, is that we have a wide diversity of schools and positions represented on our call. We have heads of schools, we have trustees, and development staff members. And all of you are from NWAIS schools, since this is a webinar offered exclusively to NWAIS. So thank you all for joining us today. And we also wanted to mention that we recently unveiled this presentation along with our survey findings at the NWAIS Institutional Leadership Conference back in November. And some of you joined us for that presentation as well. So thank you and welcome back. So what we'll cover today is what we learned from all of you via the NWAIS Endowment Survey. And we'll explore how you can prepare for, launch, grow, and demystify for your school community this whole endowment thing. And as Noria mentioned, we'll have time for questions at the end, but I will plow through our findings and recommendations starting right now. So Barb and I, of course, first went to what is an endowment. And the dictionary and other sources really don't offer a comprehensive definition. And so we went deeper. We started with a definition from Catherine Murray, and she says that an endowment is a fund or collectively invested individual funds established to generate income for your school's long-term investment and benefit. And we added a bit of a nuance to this and said that not only that, but an endowment fund is a supplemental revenue stream that helps you meet your community needs. And specifically, it adds to but doesn't replace other sources of revenue. So we had that in mind as we worked our way through this survey work. But first wanted to address why this topic and why it's new. We all know endowments are not new, but we know that the future is here and there are dramatic shifts taking place in the educational landscape, which I'm sure you're all seeing in your daily lives in the work that you do. Independent schools are bumping up against a market with lots of competition, whether it's from other independent schools or more options being offered in public schools, including special programs, special tracks for students, and even online education. You're now competing against places like Stanford that offer online high schools. So the world is a completely different place than it was even just a decade ago. And this really means the more diverse your revenue sources are beyond traditional tuition, the better prepared your school will be to weather what's to come and really realize the sustainability that you're searching for. And this is where endowment comes in. So by offering a reliable, predictable, supplemental revenue stream that you can leverage for opportunities and also use to protect your core mission during difficult times. So we'll dig into this much more, but first I want to share with you what we found through our survey. So we collaborated with NWAIS leaders on critical issues, and really what we mean by this is the big questions we wanted to answer for you all about endowments, and developed an online survey that was emailed out to 110 NWAIS schools in July of this year, 2014, and we received a great response rate. We were pleased, especially during the summer months, that we had a 29% response rate. So that meant that 32 schools responded, and what we found is that the respondents were very reflective of the profile of schools here in the Northwest region. They tended to be younger schools, founded after 1975, majority, mid to large schools, and most of them included elementary and middle school populations. In this survey, we were able to build a profile of who is it that has endowments, what sort of schools are doing this. We found that those schools with endowments tend to skew older, probably no surprise there for you, are larger, and are more likely to have staff dedicated to alumni relations and planned giving. Many have some planned giving program, even if it's not overly formal, and most of them have a major gifts focus, meaning not just the size of gifts, but also is reflective of a more donor-centered relationship approach, which we'll talk about in a little while. And most of them are looking at growing their current endowment. That is a priority. So kind of the flip side is the profile of schools without an endowment tend to be younger, smaller, and rarely have staff dedicated to alumni relations. And none of them had staff dedicated to planned giving. So what we heard is growing existing endowments is a top strategic priority for schools who participated in the study. Nearly half of the schools, about 44%, said it was a top priority to grow their current endowment in the next 5 years. And combined with those schools who are looking at starting an endowment, a total of 67% of the schools will be building an endowment in some way over the next 5 years. However, we also heard from those schools without an endowment, starting one within the next 5 years was not a priority. We also heard that major and planned gift programs paved the way for endowments. So what we saw was nearly 2/3 of the schools said they have a major gift program. And those schools without an endowment tended to also report they didn't have a major gift or planned gift program. So this really points to planned giving and major gifts laying the foundation for a strong endowment program as well. Far and away, we heard that endowments for the schools who participated support financial aid. So over 3/4 of endowments, whether they're donor designated or board designated, support financial aid and tuition assistance. It wasn't even close in terms of the other priorities that endowments fund. We also heard, and keep in mind that many of the respondents to the survey were heads of school themselves, but heads of schools are perceived as more informed about endowment principles and practices than board members and development staff. So several respondents to the survey commented on the need for more education for board members and staff around the principles, basics of endowment, including the purpose and benefits of starting an endowment and how to go about building one. We also heard that outright gifts to endowment come from a variety of constituencies, including current parents, which is not always what you would expect. While schools who are primarily serving the upper grades report their donor-designated endowment gifts came from a mix of current parents, alumni, parents of alumni, and grandparents. Schools who serve primarily the lower grades see the gifts coming primarily from alumni parents. We thought this might be because younger parents are not yet at the point where they're, let's just say, maximizing their earning potential and are relatively new in many cases to the concept of philanthropy. And then finally, we see that the schools are using a combination of strategies to build their endowments. And we'll go a bit more into what these strategies are later. I'll just wrap up our key findings here. And this first one at the top is probably not news to you, but it's important to point out that philanthropy is deeply ingrained in independent schools. So regardless of grade served, the age of the school, we found that 94% of the responding schools have staff dedicated to development, which is very encouraging. All the schools in the study have an annual fund that invites gifts from the school community, and most have an annual special fundraising event. So fundraising is part of your DNA already. And this last one here we'll go deep into in our strategies, but I'll just say that we saw that donor recognition by giving level is a common practice in schools. Nearly 3/4 of the schools who responded list their donors by giving level instead of alphabetical order. And this is, as we'll talk about, foundational and shifting from a more participatory oriented culture to moving to personally significant gifts or major gifts. So with that, I'm going to walk through some of the strategies that we recommend for laying the foundation for an endowment and building your endowment. So wherever you are along that spectrum, hopefully there will be one or several strategies here that speak to you. So the first one that we wanted to point out is creating a strategic development plan that goes beyond a calendar of activities. And we say this because 9 out of 10 times when we're asking a school, whether it's a newer school or a school that's been around for more than a century, when we ask to see their development plan, we often get more or less a detailed calendar that includes who, by when, and the deliverables for the next year, but not necessarily a deeper thought about the strategy and the goals. So what does this look like? What does a strategic development plan look like? Bear with me, I know that this is one slide on a topic that Colin's group has done day-long sessions about in terms of how to build a strategic development plan. But this is just the high-level framing of what that looks like. If you want to go deeper, we are happy to share resources, so be in touch if this is an area that you specifically have interest in. But I'll just say here, in terms of the context of building an endowment, the plan should correlate to the school's, your school's strategic priorities and include both financial and non-financial goals and the constituent-specific strategies, so by alumni, current parents, grandparents, etc. Specific messaging, benchmarks, and the staff resources you'll need to do it all. The work to build this plan will help staff and trustees monitor and evaluate the overall sustainability of your development program, not only year by year, but month by month, and really expand thinking beyond whether the budgeted annual fundraising goal was met. So related to the financial and non-financial goals, we know school boards often tend to look to the bottom line and celebrate or worry based on whether the budget was met. Hopefully this doesn't relate to you, but I'm guessing it probably does. But what boards and staff are missing by just looking at financial goals are the non-financial goals that point to longer-term growth beyond the annual fundraising results. So thinking about donor retention, our donors in the school community giving year after year, are we retaining them after families leave the school? And what is our return on the investments that we're making in some of the events that we are doing to raise these funds? And it's really not just about the participation rate in general, but also thinking about who is giving the donations. Is it new parents? Is it alumni? Is it alumni parents? If we're not looking at who is giving, then 1 year it could be one person who gave. This is obviously an overblown example, but one person who gave all the money and you met your budget, and then the next year that family leaves the school, they stop giving, and then you're in a place where you don't have anything to build on in the coming year. So really focusing on not just what was raised, but also the strategies and the donors who got you there. And then finally, just an argument for benchmarks. With the school cycle, we know that you often have a fall event, maybe it's an annual fund drive, and then a springtime event, often an auction. And then by the time you look at your final fundraising results, it's May or June, and everyone's tired and done and ready for summer vacation. And there's not much that can be done until the next fall. So it's really important to set up the benchmarks that might help you to revisit non-financial goals and financial goals quarterly or even monthly throughout the year so you can monitor and evaluate if you're on track. So moving into strategy 2, no surprise here, but including major gifts as part of your development strategy is fundamental in terms of laying the foundation for an endowment. So you can do major gifts no matter who or how many are in your school community. As I mentioned earlier, it's really about getting beyond the participation culture, or what you could say is the mentality that everyone just gives something. So in terms of how you would go about starting where you are, the definition of a major donor can be whatever fits for your school. It could be $500 or $50,000. Your top prospect list for major donors can be 10 people long or 150 people long, depending on your staff resources and, again, who is in your community. But either way, whether it's a short list, long list, you're aiming for people who can give 500 or 50,000. A major gifts program is really characterized by tailored strategies that are tied to interests and values. So prioritizing face-to-face conversations for your head of school and even trustees about what the donor, whether they're a current parent or alumnus, what they're interested in. So maybe it's briefing them on the new science program, but really thinking through what matters to them. Another defining characteristic is, the making requests for specific amounts or ranges, and this can be a big hurdle for schools to get beyond, instead of just asking for a gift, but doing the research and listening to the donor to know what would be a respectful amount that you could ask for. That really starts to shift the culture of the school to be more inclusive of a major gift approach. And then finally, tracking all this activity in your database, tracking the strategy and the relationship development can be really key in making sure it actually happens. Starting with your board is a good way to dip your toe in. So treating every trustee like they're a major donor. This means, asking them for an annual gift face-to-face, including potentially other trustees as peers in the ask. And then, long-term building a board that's reflective of your fundraising priorities. If one of your priorities is to build an endowment, looking for trustees who have that interest in investing in endowment to model for others in the community really does make a difference. So it's really, again, about starting where you are and building from there, and it will likely look different for each school. Moving into our third strategy, creating a case for support that makes it easy for the school community to understand what an annual fund makes possible versus what an endowment makes possible. And we know the story for these is very different. So in general, at the highest level, the case is based on your fundraising strategy for short-term, medium-term, and long-term needs. For short-term, we kind of called out here annual fund and auction as an example, but essentially what you're doing each year to raise those funds for operating needs. So to keep the lights on, to pay the salaries, the things that you are already fundraising for. As you move along the spectrum, you're looking more at medium-term needs. And likely this will be through a campaign where you might be seeding a new program, or you're building a building that's going to last for the next 50 years, but not necessarily things that will last forever, which is where you land on that last box there in terms of your long-term needs. Building an endowment that can ensure your school is around for generations to come, whether you're going through tough times or trying to take advantage of wonderful opportunities, but really looking at how to supplement ongoing needs like tuition assistance. So to break this down, a little more specifically, we know that donors don't give to organizations with needs, but organizations that meet needs. So in the context of your school, here's another way to look at it. You can lead with the case for support or what vision you're making possible, whether it's program excellence, teacher development for a better school experience, financial aid to broaden access to the school, or mission insurance depending on opportunities or hard times. But typically we see a combination of all four of these buckets, so to speak. And really they feed down then into the more short-term annual fund auction where impact is more immediate. Kind of think of this like the checking account that you need for your day-to-day expenses. Or they're feeding down into endowment, which is impact more permanent, long-lasting, kind of your savings account. And even with this frame of how to think about it, we know it's hard, and the impact piece has a steep learning curve. So when you're shifting from this checking account mentality to the savings account mentality, it can be hard for people to wrap their minds around investing in something like an endowment that does not have an immediate impact on their child or their student who's attending the school now. It's hard for them to think about investing in something that may not make a difference until decades down the road. And to this point, we know that not everybody is a prospect for endowment. The case for endowment won't resonate with everyone. We know that from our experience and also from the survey that current parents and grandparents are more likely to gravitate towards the annual fund. They want to know that their donations are making a difference for their student now, and it's a personal impact for their own family. We also know that alumni and alumni parents tend to gravitate more towards endowment. It's kind of that idea of repaying what they've received, paying it forward for the great experience that their child or their grandchild has had. So we'll go a little bit deeper into this. I have a slide later on that speaks to it as well. But just know that it's even if you do launch an endowment campaign, not everybody is a prospect for it, like they might be for the annual fund. The next strategy is using a variety of strategies to fund endowment growth. This was also something that we heard through the survey and was interesting to us beyond what you would think of as the fundraising strategies. But first, since we know strategies are driven by the different endowments you set up, I just wanted to throw up here a slide that walks you through the main types of endowments. The first one being what most people think of, the true endowment that permanently restricts assets. It's usually made possible by a gift from one donor, and you're permanently setting aside those funds, and there are likely limits on how they can be used. The other type of endowment that we hear about most often is the board-designated or quasi-endowment that's established by a board and funded by a variety of sources. So this could range from reserves, a line item in the annual operating budget, an overage from the annual fund, or windfalls from bequests. And it's quasi-endowment because it can be undesignated at any time. And then finally, there's also the term endowment, which could be established by either the board or a donor and set aside for a specific period of time. So say you're planning for your school's 50th anniversary, you might set aside some funds that are then released on time for that celebration. But what we heard from the survey that was most interesting is a lot of schools are reinvesting a portion of the earnings from their endowment principal to grow, or from their endowment earnings to grow their endowment principal. It's a more painless method to build up endowments, and it does make a lot of difference over time. So when you're thinking about how to grow your endowment, think beyond fundraising, which pains us to say, but it is certainly a successful strategy that's being used. Moving on to the next strategy, this is one that speaks to investing in your people to make an endowment possible. So allocating resources to educate leaders about endowment. So allocating resources to educate your staff and board leadership about an endowment as a revenue stream is important. We know endowments can be complicated and they take time and repetition to understand. There are so many different types of funds for different purposes, and they're all accounted for in different ways on the school's balance sheet. And so really training up your leaders to be able to speak to, even at a high level, these different concepts related to endowment, it can be very fruitful in terms of spreading the word to the rest of your community. We recognize that sometimes the best form of training is hands-on, even though that can be scary for staff and board members to go out the door before they feel like they've fully understood all aspects of endowment. As I said, can be hard, but it's actually the best approach, because it would be years before any of us could be endowment experts. So in the short term, identifying opportunities for board members to be a part of asking or thanking the donor, especially if it's for a gift to the endowment. Even if they don't feel like they can speak to every question that comes up in the meeting, staff and especially heads of schools can play that role and support volunteers. And to that point, investing in your annual professional development budget for development staff to attend conferences that include endowment and planned giving topics would be a wise strategy. We know locally here, Washington Planned Giving Council provides some very high quality training in this area. This is, again, not news to you, but it also is important to state that when it comes to alumni giving, taking the long view for endowment gifts is critical. It starts with student involvement in philanthropy, which is hard to comprehend that you're thinking about future endowment supporters when students are still at your school. But really starting to cultivate this culture of philanthropy through service projects, or having students be a part of thank you calls for the annual fund, even just tagging items at the school auction. So helping them to understand that philanthropy is a part of what makes your school run. And then once students graduate, parents are often the best connection to them, and paying special attention to their ongoing engagement, even though they aren't in the drop-off line every day, is critical. For elementary schools, where we know parents make their lifelong friends oftentimes, finding opportunities annually to bring the whole family back to campus can be really important, as it reminds them of what you're doing, even if their student is not there any longer. And for upper schools, asking parents to help the school keep in touch with graduates as they move through college and beyond is key to bridging your school experience with their other school experiences like college. So all of this to say, the time between a post by a recent graduate on your alumni Facebook page to their first gift may be at least a decade. So it's a long-term investment, but it's something that not only benefits your endowment, but also your annual fund fundraising efforts. So as I mentioned earlier, we heard through the survey loud and clear that recognizing donors by giving level is something that schools are doing, and they're doing with great success. Probably the majority of you have at some point or another grappled with how to recognize your donors, and probably some of you are in the camp of this is distasteful and divisive to call out the giving level of those in our school community, kind of pit different economic levels against each other, and very much can be contrary to a school environment. But at the same time, we've seen that schools who've grappled with this challenge and have moved through it have benefited, because it starts the conversation about philanthropy, and even if you don't land on listing your donors by giving level, people start to talk about it, and even that is great. The nuance really comes in where and how you do it. So we're not saying that you should only recognize donors by giving level. You know, giving level and alphabetical order or other ways that you can recognize donors are not mutually exclusive. You can have in your annual report lists of your loyal donors. You can list volunteer hours. You can list even an alphabetical list as well. But really it's about recognizing what everyone in the community has contributed. With permanent recognition, listing by giving level can be as big as a huge wall in your school lobby, or it can be as subtle as names etched on a bench. So that's another thing to take into consideration, is how to present these lists. The bottom line is that recognizing donors by giving level is the most effective way to educate and inspire members of your school community whose capacity may not match their experience with or understanding of philanthropy. And even though many schools fear that this form of recognition will foster an exclusive culture of philanthropy, in fact, we find the opposite is often true. It helps to make the money conversation less taboo, and it really does inspire those who seek peer recognition to step up and give more. It also models generosity for donors who may not come from a philanthropic culture or tradition, and lays the path for, again, future investments in endowment. In terms of permanent recognition related to endowment, we see that primarily what we see is that named funds are the way that donors are recognized. And the benefit of having a named fund as part of your endowment is that these donors and their loved ones are more likely to contribute ongoing to the fund when they approach special life milestones like birthdays or anniversaries. So it can be a source for ongoing gifts, even beyond the initial one to set up the fund. So moving into our final two strategies here, the first one is adopting board policies to support the endowment. So this goes to the importance of laying the groundwork ahead of launching into fundraising for an endowment. With gift acceptance policies, hopefully this is something you already have in place even for your annual fundraising, because it speaks to what types of gifts your school is willing to accept and who will decide what gifts will be accepted, whether it's a subcommittee of the board or a combination of school leadership and board members. But laying that out in advance so that there are not awkward conversations down the road about how you cannot accept a gift. You have something you can point to that liberates you from gifts that may be more expensive than they're worth. The second area is an investment policy, and you may already have this in place. It's fairly common, especially if you already have an endowment, but it speaks to how the funds will be managed. And often it's a question that donors who are thinking about a gift to your endowment will ask is, how are the funds going to be managed and by whom, and what's the strategy? I want to make sure that there are good stewards of my gift. And then finally, the third main policy that we'd recommend you consider are your spending and holding priorities. So what will it look like over time, and how will you determine that you don't spend outside of the realm of the original goal for which the endowment has been established? So I know I'm glossing over these policies, but again, we have a lot of resources that we can point you to if this is an area that you'd like more information on. But the takeaway here is really, before you go out into the field and start to make requests for endowments, make sure you have these basic policies in place to protect your school. And then finally, the last strategy here speaks to something that I alluded to earlier, that not every donor is an endowment prospect. Be mindful that in your finite donor community, those loyal donors with significant assets and a sophisticated approach to philanthropy will be more likely the ones you turn to for endowment investments. And this is not to say that you cannot move others towards this over time through education and ongoing involvement. But this is where most schools turn to first. Encourage current parents and grandparents who will be with you for a long time and who are interested in an endowment to continue their annual support, in addition to investing in the school's future. So what I mean by this is, for parents or grandparents for whom the graduation is on the horizon from your school, their youngest child or their only child is preparing to move on, really I would encourage you to consider asking them to make an ultimate gift that would endow the support that they've given through the annual fund over the time that they have been at the school. And framing it that way can be very powerful in terms of protecting the investments that they've already made. And I'll share with you an example of what this could look like in your school. So in terms of moving current parents through the school and securing an endowment gift, framing it again as that ultimate gift to endow their annual giving, it speaks to this idea of helping them to pay forward the good education that their student receives so that future generations can also have the same opportunity. And again, protecting the large investment that they've already made in the school. And starting that discussion before they leave the school is key. So you're looking here at a strategy example. This family has 2 kids, and they're now in 4th and 6th grade at a K-8 school. And they've been making leadership gifts for about 4 years. And you may have been cultivating them by inviting them to a leadership gift dinner as a thank you, and maybe even a more tailored approach of having your head of school meet with them face-to-face individually to talk through their interest in science education. So while they're still at the school, you're leading each year with what's been happening in the classroom around science education, which is their interest, and looking ahead to that endowment gift, starting to plant the seeds, the idea for making that gift. You've done research, and you have found that they have the capacity to make an endowment gift up to $100,000. But keeping in mind, while they're still at the school, that they would also be making an annual fund gift would also be very important. So when you sit down to make this ask 2 years before their student has graduated, you're asking them to increase their annual fund gift from $3,000 to $5,000 over as much as maybe 5 years as they transition out of the school. And at the same time, making that ask for $100,000 to the endowment that would, again, secure their investments through the annual fund. So this is one way to approach it with a constituency that you wouldn't normally think of for endowments, current parents, but we have seen it be successful. So we're coming up here on the last 15 minutes of our call, and just wanted to summarize what I've laid out as strategies in a nutshell. When you're thinking about starting an endowment, this is how you know that you're ready. So going down this checklist, the board perceives that long-term sustainability is a fiduciary duty. So it's a top priority. The school is financially healthy, and you have a plan for your future that's maybe even beyond a typical 3 to 5 year strategic plan. But you have some sort of North Star that your school is driving towards. And you've articulated clear, short, and long-term strategic priorities for fulfilling your mission. And you have an established annual giving program that meets immediate needs. Related to fundraising, you have loyal major donors who are educated and cultivated. So you've started along that spectrum of moving from participatory to a more focused one-on-one strategy for those donors who can make major gifts. And your leaderships, I mean your head of school, your trustees, are prepared to not only ask others to make significant gifts, such as major gifts or gifts to the endowment, but they themselves are also doing so. So they're modeling this practice. And then you have the policies and procedures in place that we discussed earlier to support all of these efforts. So all of these strategies, as well as a detailed spectrum that talks about whether your school is newer, older, bigger, smaller, how you can move from having no endowment to establishing and growing your endowment. So it shows it as a spectrum. That, along with the recommendations, are included in a survey report that we will be releasing on our website and will be emailed out right after we complete this webinar. So know that there's another document that you can share with your trustees or other colleagues who weren't able to be on this call that can help point you in the right direction. But with that, I will stop talking so that you all can start to ask me questions that you have about this topic. And just a reminder, you can ask questions by typing them into the comment box on your screen. It looks like there was a question about whether the slides will be available to share with others, and the answer to that, which I think Nori has already answered as well, but just to reiterate, the answer is yes, they'll be available on our website. So we have a question up from Amy Betzlor, who said, what's the best advice for moving a school culture to a major gift culture? So this speaks to what we were talking about earlier, moving from a culture that's very focused on everybody participate, give a gift of anything, we just need 100% participation, to a culture that's more focused on major gifts. And I would say the first step in doing this is defining who it is, who are your best prospects for major gifts. And the best way to identify this is often sitting down with a group of current parents, alumni, who are connected with your community and can provide feedback to you if you don't know on who might be capable of making a larger gift. And starting with this list, even if it's 5 people or 10 people, and inviting them for a non-threatening face-to-face lunch or dinner, starting with the head of school, and just listening. So it's really about getting to know them beyond who they are as parents or alumni, but really asking them questions about, and even if their answers don't fit into your current strategic plan, it at least points to where their interest is. And then the key for major giving is not only hearing this feedback, but then keeping in touch with them and through individualized phone calls or emails or other meetings, and updating them on this area of their interest. So if it was science education and maybe you just finished your science fair, picking up the phone to say, you know, I know your student is no longer at the school, but just wanted to let you know that we just completed a science fair. It was a great success, and you know, part of the donation that you made last year helped to make this program possible. Thank you so much. So it's circling back to let them know about the impact that their gifts are having, so that by the next time you go and sit down with them and you ask them for a gift that's maybe a larger gift than what they've given before, they have a good sense of what their investment has made possible. So that's a short answer to what could be a much longer full presentation, but again, it's focusing on your top prospects, whether it's 5 or 100, and thinking about tailored strategies that staff and trustees can use to build the relationship. So we have another question here about whether we would combine capital and endowment campaigns. And so this is something that we see often. We're often doing planning studies or feasibility studies to explore whether donors have interest in both capital and endowment at the same time. I think the argument for combining capital and endowment is so that there's something for everyone in your campaign. So for current parents who are going to be at your school for a long time, they might be more interested in the capital component. But if you're also trying to engage alumni or parents of alumni, having an endowment component can be very useful in terms of engaging that broader audience in the campaign effort. So I think it's clarifying what you're trying to accomplish and whether outreach to a larger school community, meaning the alumni and others who maybe you don't see every day, whether that is something you have the bandwidth to do and whether there's interest. So using a feasibility study or planning study to determine whether people want to contribute to endowment in addition to capital would be a good way to approach it. But we do see the full spectrum of capital only, endowment only, to a combination of both. So thanks for the questions. Keep them coming in. We have a few more here. So we have a question about, with a very small endowment and no formal investment strategy, what would you suggest as a short-term place to invest those funds? So I think this is a question about how to manage the funds, which is not necessarily our firm's area of expertise, but what I would suggest as kind of a broader strategy beyond that is even if you don't have a formal investment strategy, having a committee of trustees and others set up, maybe it's called the investment committee, to make those decisions, explore the options, interview investment firms or other financial institutions to understand what your options are. And that also helps you in terms of representing to donors how you're using their funds. You can assure them that you've done your research, you've reached out to other financial firms to explore the options, and you made the best decision for the school. So involving more than just one person in that decision and taking it beyond the board can be useful. So Daniel, I know that didn't exactly answer your question, but I think it does vary based on your priorities for the endowment and your strategy if you want it to be more conservative or more aggressive, and an investment firm would probably be the best source for that answer. We also have a question about an example of a gift a school would not accept. This comes from Michael Murphy, and he had suggested tobacco, stock, land, and those are all good examples. You know, the tobacco example is one that through your gift acceptance policy you would clarify gifts that would be in opposition of your school's mission. So if you're, which you know all schools are, tobacco-free zone, you know, accepting tobacco stock would seem to be in direct contradiction to what you're promoting for the students. So that's a really good example, anything that contradicts your mission. And then with your other example of land, accepting land that might have more of a cost to you than what it's actually worth would be a good reason not to take it on. So laying out in your gift acceptance policy the parameters of going through, you know, land assessments and environmental studies before you accept that gift of land. Otherwise, you could easily get into a position of having to spend money rather than receiving a gift. And some schools and other organizations have gift acceptance policies that for land gifts or gifts of property, they have a sell immediately policy, and that also relates to stocks as well. So even if you accept certain gifts, you also want to explore whether you could immediately sell them off if it's not your desire to go into the property management business, which is probably the case for you. So these are all really good questions that you should be asking as you're building out that gift acceptance policy, and to be clear up front before the gift arrives and you have to kind of make it up on the fly. So we are coming up on the end of our time here. I know there were a few more questions, but feel free to follow up with us offline and we can continue the conversation. Up on the screen now you'll see both my email and Barb's email. Both of those are good places to reach out. And then also on our website, collinsgroup.com, we have a lot of resources that you can download and use. But if you're not seeing quite what you are looking for, please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. So thank you all for being a part of this call this morning. Hopefully it's given you some good food for thought, whether you're thinking about starting or building an endowment. And hopefully even beyond that, it's just giving you some good tangible next steps to strengthen your fundraising program at your school. And again, look for our survey report to be posted right after I hang up, and it'll also be landing in your email inbox, I believe, as well. So look for that and keep in touch. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.